Welcome to episode 4 of Frags and Beer Radio. My name is Trevor. As usual, I'm coming at you from our temporary home on SoundCloud, hopefully soon to be coming at you from the Frags and Beer Radio channel on YouTube, which I'm hoping to set up soon. So this is kind of a spur-of-the-moment, spontaneous recording I wanted to do. I actually, right before I left work today, I happened to read an article on Break that almost made me have an aneurysm when I got to the end of it, and I took some time to think about it, and I took some time to read it again, and I read the study that it cites, and then I went for a bike ride to make sure that I could compress my thoughts into something that would actually make sense, because I was pretty well peeved when I read this, and some of you may know, some of you may not know, but I'm a pretty big proponent of everybody who wants to do what they love, everybody who wants to do what they enjoy or their dream, they should be able to go for it. And when I see what I've seen recently with the games media and online outlets writing articles about how dangerous it is for women in the industry, or how dangerous it is for gamers, or how awful it is for women who game, it burns me to the core, because I game with a lot of women. I've been a gamer, and I'm going to put this out there because I'm going to call into question some people's credibility when they talk about gaming, so that mine is concrete and out there. I've been a gamer for most of my life, and I'll be 40 years old next year. My first gaming system was an Atari 5200 that my parents bought brand new. It wasn't a retro game system that they bought. It wasn't one of those Ataris that plays all the games. It was brand new right off the shelf. Was at 81, 82 that came home. And from there on out, that's what I loved, gaming. And this hobby that I love, I firmly believe, is for everybody. If you want to make it your career or your hobby or just something that you do to wind down after a stressful day at work, that's what it's for. That's what we do this for. And everybody, I think everybody can, and everybody does, and a lot of people do. And I, for years, have been talking to women who game. I've gamed with women in different gaming groups, whether it be my first person gaming clan or guilds that I've been part of on Guild Wars or whatever it's been. I've interviewed women who game for my site. I've interviewed a couple on this channel, and all of them pretty much unanimously express the idea that if anybody tells you you can't game because you're a woman, or you shouldn't do it because it's not for you, they pretty firmly agree that the only valid response to that is F off. And I quite firmly agree. And so I'm reading this article, which if you haven't read it, you might have missed the entire day. But the title of this article that was posted on the Washington Post, which seems to be following the lovely tabloid path of such prestigious publications as Gawker and Jezebel, put up an article by Caitlin Dewey yesterday called "Men Who Harass Women Online Are Quite Literally Losers," comma. And she could have stopped there. That is a valid and true statement. If you harass women online, I don't care why, I don't care who you are, you're a loser. And it has nothing to do with how good you are or bad you are at games. You are, quite literally, a loser. But she had to continue with a new study finds. So, we have a study out there. And I read it, and you can read it too. It's linked in her article, and you'll get the link to this first, but I'm going to put a link to the archive, because I don't think the Washington Post should get a dime for this horrendous article that they put. I don't think they should get anything for it. So I'm not going to give you a link to the Washington Post. I usually don't share archive links, but this is quite terrible, and I'll tell you why. You might be surprised why I think this is terrible. We'll get there. Bear with me. So anyway, this article cites a study that was done. Let me find that date again. I read this I tried to get through some of this data, but anybody who knows me, I am not a math whiz. Okay, so this article came out July 15th, so not too long ago. And the premise, they wanted to see if gender inequality, and this is right out of the headline, their abstract, their premise. This is what they're trying to find. Gender inequality and sexist behavior is prevalent in almost all workplaces, which that statement is more honest than a lot of what the gaming press and a lot of the mainstream media has been putting out for almost the last year now. Gender inequality and sexism is prevalent in almost all workplaces. It does happen. Nobody's going to deny it happens here and there from time to time. It's not any worse anywhere than it is anywhere else. It's not, there is no one place that's worse than any other, is what I'm trying to say. So they do this study to see if that's the case. And what they did is they actually took a previous study, if I'm understanding this layout right. They did not have participants in a lab. They didn't tell anybody what they were doing. They actually had recorded 163 games of Halo. They had created a control voice. They had created a male and a female voice. So they had three quote-unquote players. Did not say who was actually at the control. What they'd done is they pre-recorded statements. The control didn't talk. And the male and the female had pre-recorded statements that they said. The study says that the statements were benign, non-hostile, and non-offensive. Things like "good game," "I like this map," etc. Nothing gender or game-specific except for the tone of voice. So the only thing that everybody had to go on was what they were hearing over the in-game chat. So they recorded these games using audio-video connections, a computer. They recorded the audio on the on-game chat, and they really could only concentrate on the people who were members of the team of the quote-unquote test subject, because they said that, as Halo goes, the opposing team, you only interact with them between matches in the lobby. So there was no real, I guess you could say there was no real measure of the trash talk you expect and everybody is aware of. There was no measure of that from the other side. The other side was getting whooped. There was no real measure of how they reacted to it based on voice or anything. So this is completely based on the reactions of the members of their team. So they recorded these games, and they had found, and this is pretty much where we skip a boatload, and you can go read it. The link will be in the article. You can go if you can understand all of these numbers. You're doing a lot better than me. So I skipped down to, and at the end of every research paper there is a conclusion. In this case they call it a discussion, but it's basically a breakdown in less complicated terms of what the study found or did not find and how it relates to what they were trying to present, what they were trying to prove or disprove, or what they were trying to come up with. So at the end of this article, it explains how a lot of this, and this is stuff I've been talking about for a long time in articles when I write about gender in competition or the interaction between male and females. Very much of that is part of our core, part of our instincts, part of what makes us human, which we are animals. We're at the very core, at the very base of us, we are animals. Just because we can think and talk and reason and we can make tools and drive cars and fly planes and blah, 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 we're still animals. We're still, at our core, very close to our primate cousins, who can't do all those things. really the only thing that separates us is our ability to reason. But those instincts, those fight or flight instincts, those survival instincts, those procreation instincts, those things that make us eat when we're hungry and scare us from things that should, those life or death kind of instincts, those are all there, and they're still there, and they're as old as we are. They're as old as our species is, and they're not going to go away no matter what we do about it, no matter how much we try to overthink it, because those are the things that make us evolve. And if we stop evolving, God's forbid that something really serious happens to this world and we have to try to live without all the conveniences we have in a society where people have forgotten those things, those survival instincts, how to take care of oneself without your Starbucks down the road, without your cell phone and your car and your internet and all that stuff, because we'd really be in trouble if that came to be. So the discussion, the conclusion of this article goes into a lot of how this supports, or what they found. I guess I should say what they found first. They found that as members of a team, now all the players, all the 158 players that they interacted with, were all men. Halo is some statistic thrown out there. Halo is said to be 95% male. So it's no surprise you're going to play a lot of matches and not run into a woman. They said that it's possible that there were female players on the team, but they didn't talk. They were only able to record a certain number of people responding. So it's possible that there were women in the study and they just didn't know it because they didn't talk. So that's one of the things that I'd like to point out before we go any further, is there is no measure of how women react to women based on skill level in this study. And that's what the study looks at, is skill level, how people react to other people based on how well they're doing in the game is the most basic way I can explain it. So they had determined that men who were doing really well tended to be more supportive of the other men and women, more supportive of the male and female team members if they were doing really well. And if they were doing very poorly, they seemed to be very much more negative to the female team member, and more negative than they were to the male team member. And their conclusion is that these men who were doing more poorly, less skilled, felt their status threatened. They try to explain it on an instinctual level, which in a way makes sense. There's a lot of biology, a lot of evolutionary logic, I guess, if that's even a phrase that makes sense. But there's a lot of that in this study that explains how we are as animals. Not so much that these men are sexist because they're sexist, or that they hate women. And I have to put out there, the word misogyny does not exist that I could find. Let me real quick do a Control F. Yes, the word misogyny is not in this study. So let me just put that out there. Kudos to them for not using that. So they're not trying to show that the men reacted this way because they hate women. It's because they felt their status was lower, and that their status was lower than the other men on their team. So they felt threatened, which makes sense in a way. If you imagine how a tribe or you call it a clan of apes act, lower status males find any way they can to not lose what little status they have. That's that instinctual animal thing that's part of us. So that's what this study tried to show, and I think they did pretty good. And hopefully you didn't hear that ding. My damn recording device decided that it wanted to offer me a free download. So that's what they came to. And the last two paragraphs I found really interesting. Besides the fact that they had no basis of female to female interaction, which to me I think would be important. I think it would be important to see if there's any correlation between women interacting with each other in games, because I know when I game with my guys, my guy friends, and my gaming clan actually always has had, and still has female players, and they jump right in there and call us a lot of names too, just like we call each other names, because there's a sense of genderless camaraderie as a team. We've been gaming together for so long. But anyway, I'm keep going off track here. So anyway, this last two paragraphs I found kind of interesting, because they go into trying to find they say that the video games, this is one of the points that I wanted to make before I get back to the article. Their study, they said, demonstrates that video games offer a unique opportunity to examine variation in sexist behavior and the situations that result in change in sexist attitudes. By demonstrating the female-directed hostility primarily originates from low-status, poorer-performing males, our results suggest that a way to counter it may be through teaching young males that losing to the opposite sex is not socially debilitating. And that's interesting, because there are a lot of anti-feminists out there, and there are a lot of people out there that support equality feminism, or support a type of feminism that says that men are also part of this. When you tell a man not to cry, or when you tell a boy that losing to a girl is somehow worse than losing to a boy, those are bad things. I was never taught that way, and I'm not any worse off. I think I'm better off. I've no problems losing any game to anybody. I don't care. And I don't think it makes me weaker. And I've done my best to teach my son that. And I think that's a very valid point. And the only way you're going to do that is to get more women into gaming. Not just and they quote, unfortunately, the 52% to 48% gaming. Between men and women in this article too, which is disappointing in a way, because the type of game they're studying does not have that kind of split. First-person shooters, which they do specify, first-person shooters are primarily a male-biased community. Those type of games men tend to like more than women. It doesn't say anything about one or the other, it's just preference. I know a lot of women who like first-person shooters. They love them, and they get into them, and they scream and yell, and they curse, and they throw controllers, and they do everything that anybody would do. But the point this article is trying to make is that by understanding this interaction, it might help us to make people better people, not change games, not force some sort of social change in games, but to teach men that it's okay to lose, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're not going to teach men to lose, and this is the point. You're not going to teach men it's okay to lose to women if there are no women around for them to lose to. And just like I started this audio series and some of my articles, I was tired of the media constantly pushing this narrative that makes it sound scary for girls to get into gaming, because that's not helping anybody. We want more gamers. I don't know about everybody else, but me, I don't know any gamer out there that says we don't want more gamers. I want more gamers. Tons of gamers. Bring more gamers. I don't care. So that's important when I get into, the article that's over on the Washington Post. So anyway, read those last couple of paragraphs. I think you'll find them interesting. They do go into speculate that there are a lot of other factors that may not have come out, that they couldn't catch in the study. There's still a lot of questions. One of the things they say is individuals may simply be responding to more aggressively toward individuals with a higher pitched voice, as dominance is predicated by voice pitch. Pardon me. So it may not be that they thought the woman was female, but naturally that someone with a higher pitched voice is a weaker individual or weaker human, so they react in that way. So like they said, they can't rule that out. There are a lot of questions. There are a lot of things. So the study does not call itself definitive. That's the thing that's very important. And it also does not in any way here say that this is a representation of the entire gaming culture. That's very important. This article says specifically that it is just a representation of the small sample that they took. 163 games, 158 people. I mean, that's not even enough to be a poll for what new Frito-Lay chip flavor you want. 158 people is not a data sample. That's barely that's not a poll. That's not 158 people, you could fit those in a high school basketball gymnasium. That's not a lot of people. So nowhere in the article do they say that this represents anything more than the 163 games, 158 people that they interacted with. It doesn't even represent how females react to females. And like they said, there's a lot of factors in here that they could not get out of this study. But what they didn't want to do was use a lab, because people change how they react when they know they're in a study. There's a lot of other behavior that comes into play, so they stayed away from that. So go read the data points and all that stuff. Definitely, that is worth a read. I think that this study, because it's factual and because it's not trying to pin gamers as any one particular awful kind of thing. I think this study is worth a good look. I really do. I'd be interested to hear other analysis by people who know more about this kind of stuff than I do. I guess I said 189 players spoke in the games that they played. So that counts both teams. Only 147 individuals were team members. So again, I'd like to hear what other people have to say. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are smarter than me that are going to break this down into more detail. But it looks like a pretty legit kind of study. It's published in a science journal. It's peer reviewed. So there's really no point in trying to debunk this. I really don't think there's anything to debunk, because they're not trying to make any claim. But when that article or when that study gets inserted into an article with an agenda, all of a sudden we have some definitives that were, some of this was not even actually in the article, and this is where I started to get a little upset. But not until we get to the end did I really feel flames shooting out of my eyeballs. So anyway, we get into this study, and they say, well, here they get into this article. Here's the study. They say they get, she leads in, Caitlin leads in with here's where it's from. Here's all the data, and she even gives you links. And she, of course, gives you a link to the only guide to Gamergate you'll ever need to read. I don't know if that's inserted by Washington, Post or by her. Either way, that automatically is trying to spin this into the whole scene, which is interesting enough because there are certain things about this article that just bugged me enough to almost call this so shoddy. I wouldn't even call this a journalistic piece, because it takes a lot of liberties with a factual piece of science, and that's really where I start to have problems. She points out here that no matter their skill level or how the game went, men tended to be pretty cordial to each other. That's not necessarily what the study found. The study found that they treated each other relatively the same. The number of positive comments were about the same. I'm not really sure how they gauged or what they considered positive and negative, and if they accounted for the normal shit talk is all I can really call it. Did they account for those kinds of things? That's not really detailed that I could find anyway, not detailed in the study. I'm not really sure what constitutes a positive or negative interaction. But when they say that the men tended to be pretty cordial to each other, I've been gaming for a long time. I've been gaming online for a long time, and I can tell you right now that guys are not usually that cordial to each other, especially when they know each other. Now, these guys might have all been complete strangers, but chances are they've run into each other once or twice. There is a pretty tight-knit community around Halo on Xbox Live. And I've heard recordings of people on Xbox Live, especially the younger you get, the louder and more vulgar these people tend to be. And that's just the way, that's just what gaming is. That's just how it goes. I get some people don't like it. Some people are intimidated by it. Some people jump into this thing head first, and they find a group of people that are willing to say some of the most awful things to each other with a smile on their face, and then realize that they're just giving you crap. But that's not for everybody, and unfortunately, you can't, like they say, you can't police everybody. You're not ever going to be able to. So she goes to paraphrase the article. And then says again, in other words, sexist dudes are literally losers. Well, yes, sexist dudes are losers. But again, I don't think her definition of sexism is quite what the article is pointing out. The article, or not the article, the study. The study seems to point to a definition of sexism that isn't entirely negative, if that makes sense, because it's pointing to a lot of our instinctual base, drive. What makes us people, not the kind of conscious or purposeful sexism. I think that's the difference. Her definition of sexism, and I may be extrapolating or guessing, speculating on what she did, but I've read previous articles by Caitlin, so I know that her definition of sexism is not quite the same unconscious, instinctual interaction between the sexes that the study seems to be more talking about. So of course, we've got that thrown in there, and we just got to, of course, link it to Gamergate. So she goes on to talk about a Pew report, which, of course, polls are really, really scientific, I tell you what. But anyway, 40% of internet users have personally experienced harassment. I'm sure that's probably relatively true. And it says both genders are frequent victims of abuse, but women tend to get the worst of it. I don't know. I have seen and been the target of harassment and trolling and people saying nasty stuff to me online. I don't know what's worse. I don't know if I just take it easier than a lot of people. Most of it I laugh at, but I have a pretty good sense of humor, and I really don't take strangers seriously, and I especially don't take what they say about me seriously. A long time ago, I decided that there's only one person's opinion of me that matters. Then I got married, and there's two people's opinion of me that matters, and I really don't care what other people say. So it's entirely possible that when I say that the harassment I see is not that bad, it may just be the way I take it. I don't know. It's possible. But says they're particularly vulnerable to sexual harassment and stalking. That I find a little... Are they saying that women are more susceptible to it? Vulnerable is a weird word, because everybody online is vulnerable to the same extreme. If you go on Twitter, you can equally be targeted by anybody as anybody else can be. There's no blockage. There's nothing that says that, well, these accounts are easier to trash talk because they're females' accounts. So I'm not really sure what the Pew report is trying to say there. Do women take it differently? I probably, some women. I don't know. I've seen some women on Twitter that take shit talk and harassment and they laugh at it and they throw it right back at whoever did it. And then there are others that can't take it and they shut down or they mute or they block. And that's fine. That's what those are for. That's what those buttons are there for. If somebody's being an asshole, you block them. I do it. I know a lot of people don't like that because of free speech and blah blah blah. Yeah, they can free speech all they want at the block. I only block people who are assholes intentionally. I don't block people that are mean. I just block people that are assholes. I think of it like somebody coming to my house and I open the door and they start yelling in my face. I am not suppressing their speech by closing the door and walking away. They can yell all they want at my closed front door. So their speech is completely intact. I don't have to listen to it, though. So anyway, particularly vulnerable, I don't know. I don't like that word. Susceptible, maybe. Affects them differently, sure. men's and women's brains are different. They're chemically different. We think with different parts of our brains. There are different, for the most part, I'm sure there's always variables. We're human beings. We are the most variable things in the universe as far as I'm concerned. There is nothing more different than one human from another. So, generally speaking, sure, they may take it differently. It may hit them differently. So anyway, she goes on, says she talked to the lead author, which is possible. The weird thing is she doesn't quote him, except quoting what he wrote in the study. So she may have talked to him, but I don't know. Her only quotations are around stuff out of the article. So she pulls a couple of quotes out of the article. Of course, pulling the stuff out that supports, her idea that this is really showing that it's a broader issue, sexism online. Of course, she calls out Twitter, Reddit, and 4chan as places that sexism exists and it's frequent and male-dominated. She says that Halo is over 95% male. That should sound a lot like the frequently sexist online spaces, Twitter, Reddit, or 4chan. I don't know. I think I have a pretty even amount of followers. I don't know if Twitter's mostly male. I don't go to Reddit, 4chan, so I don't know. So then it goes on, and she does some more quotes, which that's not really it. I'm going to move on because we're getting long here. This is the part that really bugs me. This is the part that almost made me burst into flames because of why I do this and what I do. In thinking of my friends and the women that I game with, the women that I talk to, my wife who plays some video games, my mother who has played video games since Final Fantasy on the Super Nintendo. These are the two paragraphs. It starts off, well, I guess you want to say 3 paragraphs because she makes a very valid point. In other words, like your mother always said, bullies just feel bad about themselves. That's true. For the most part. Bullies tend to be people who have low self-esteem, and to make themselves feel better, they attack other people. That's generally true. That's one of the few honest little tidbits out of this whole article. It says this does not suggest any solutions, speaking the study, does not suggest any solutions or for on or offline sexism, or any hope that it will ever really end. Because the article, the study, is talking about our instinctual interaction between the sexes. That probably won't end. And if it ever ends, God's forbid we have an apocalypse or we have something that takes society back to a level where that social interaction between the sexes becomes what we need to survive. There's a reason that human beings have acted like that for so long. Because before the industrial period, before all of our modern conveniences, when even back in the days when people were so stuck to the land that they couldn't move because they could barely grow enough to pay their taxes and feed their families, that they couldn't go anywhere else. Even back then, that interaction between the sexes is what kept us alive. Like it or not, the hunter-gatherer dynamic is what allowed the human species to become what it is today. So, it may never end. It probably won't. It says, there are so many more questions we've already begun to ask. This is a quote from the study. And our results are looking really interesting. Yes, there are so many questions that they need to ask in this study. So even the authors of the study accept that this is not definitive. So any statement that this shows how gamers are is completely utter bullshit, because it's not a definitive study. And then she says, until then, ladies, Facebook and Pinterest are your friends. Those are, for better or worse, 2 of the online spaces where this type of sex ratio imbalance isn't much of a problem. Women on both sites solidly outnumber the men. Until then, ladies, stay in your place. Don't go gaming on Halo. Don't go playing Battlefield online. Don't go play in any of those games where the mean men are. I mean, really? That's what it sounds like. When I read this the first time and when I read it again, this is the third or fourth time I've looked at that statement. That's all I get out of it. Am I wrong? If I were to be having this discussion with a woman, a gamer, who said, oh, those guys on Xbox the other day, they were so mean. They said some really awful things to me, and it kind of hurt my feelings. And I looked at her and said, you know what? You should probably stick to Facebook and Pinterest, because there's less guys there. I would be surprised if she didn't hit me for that. Or, at best, never talk to me again. That is the most condescending, most disgusting thing you can say to anybody, much less when we want more. Like, I'm sure Caitlin, if you asked her, and whether she's honest about it or not, I'm sure if you asked her, do you think more women need to be in gaming? I think she'd say, yeah, we need more women gamers. You're not going to get more women gamers if you keep telling women it's dangerous to be a gamer. You're not going to get more if you keep telling them, well, it's so hard, you probably shouldn't do it. They're so mean, you should probably stick to Facebook. Are you serious? So I read that and my head exploded. Because, and not literally, figuratively, because those two words do not mean the same thing. But I read that and I thought, how can anyone, much less a woman, who has been doing nothing but writing articles about how sexist gaming is, how awful gamers are, been writing these articles about how we need to make gaming better for women, then turn around and say women should probably stick to Facebook? I want more everyone gaming. More gamers means more games. More games means more fun. I don't care who's on the other end of the keyboard, the mic, the headset, the joystick, the TV. I don't care. More. If you want a game, you should get out there and do it. Like all the women I've interviewed, and every time I ask them, what would you say to a young woman who wants to become a gamer or a game developer who might be afraid to step out there and put herself out there? What would you say? And unanimously, so far, every one of them has said, screw that. Do it. Tell those people to F off. That's the message that people should be promoting. That's the message that the media should be talking about. That's what people should be saying. So I've probably run over long and I could rant on forever about this. But yeah, read the article. I'll link it when I put this post up on my site, but I'm going to put the SoundCloud recording up ahead of time. I'll link the article in the archive. So get out there, read it. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm right. Tell me what you think. And I look forward to hearing from you.